When a parent passes away, emotions and finances tend to collide, especially when real estate is involved. One of the most common things that stalls families is fear of taxes, even when that fear isn't fully understood. Today, we're going to answer a listener question about an inherited home and hesitant siblings.
It's easy to get lost on the way to retirement. Things like taxes, improper planning, and excessive market risk can all lead you astray from your goal of a successful and happy retirement. That's where Liz Whittaberry comes in. She's a holistic financial advisor and the founder of Best Path Advisors, and she can help guide you to a better financial path. This is Retire on Your Best Path with Liz Whittaberry.
Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for tuning in to Retire on Your Best Path with Liz Whittaberry and myself here, your host, Mark Killian, to talk about today's topic, which is, the tax fears that come around when, getting property or maybe even some other things really, Liz, when it comes to inheritance when our loved ones pass away. This particular question is about property, so we'll kind of just focus on that, but I'm sure we'll touch on a few things as well. And it's a great question, and I know a lot of people, I talk with advisors all over the country, and this is a big, concern because often we're in our prime earning years, ideally, hopefully, right, with mom and dad pass later in life. Hopefully we are, maybe in our 40s or 50s, probably making the most money in our lives as well, and kind of wondering, hey, how is this going to hit us from a tax standpoint? And we won't talk about the emotional side because obviously that's there as well, but we'll just kind of focus on the tax question today. How you doing? You doing all right?
I am good. I am very good. And it is tax season, so taxes are certainly top of mind in everything that I'm doing. Yeah. But I do get this question a lot. Yeah. And as people are inheriting money, they're afraid they're going to get clobbered in taxes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, with the great wealth transfer being on, so to right, we've been talking about that for a while now. We got all this money that's going to be transferred from the boomer generation to their heirs over the next few years. You're talking about crazy amounts of money. So this is part of it, right? So let's dive in. Let me set you up with the question here, Liz, and then we'll talk about some pros and cons and things to think about for folks. Okay. All right. So here's the question. So it says, Mom died 2 years ago, and my three sisters and I inherited her house. I've always wanted to sell it. They're just now coming around to the idea, but they're worried about the tax implications. I keep telling them I don't think it's going to be as bad as they think from a tax perspective, but I don't really have the skills to explain why. Can you help us understand some of the tax breakdowns?
Like I said, that is a question that I have had people ask me when they're inheriting property from their own family, from their own parents, aunts, or uncles, or whoever's leaving it to them, and just being afraid of really getting clobbered in taxes. And on the flip side of that, I also have a lot of families that talk with me about, well, what's going to happen when I pass away and my kids inherit? And are they going to get clobbered in taxes? So it's a good question. The first and foremost thing to understand when it comes to inheriting a home or any kind of capital asset is that you get what's called a step up in basis. We call it a step up in basis because typically whatever the property is has appreciated, it's gone up in value, and the cost basis that the inheritor receives is the fair market value on the date of death. So if mom and dad paid $100,000 for this house, it's worth $500,000 on the day they pass away. The cost basis now becomes $500,000, and there's no tax on that $500,000. That's now the new cost basis.
Right. And I think that's where people get tripped up because we hear that all the time, right? So, we could even go like a bigger number, Liz, because so many people, we've seen such an explosion in home prices. I was talking with somebody just a couple of weeks back, and they were talking about their grandparents, I think, had left their mom and dad some property that they had bought along the Jersey Shore somewhere for like $50,000 or something way back when. Right. And now it was worth like $3 million. And They were just freaking out about it. And so to kind of explain that step up in basis, and here's the smart move where mom left this after she passed, right? Because they get that step up in basis. Had she have put one of the kids on there beforehand, that eliminates that. And now you are on the hook for the taxes, correct?
That is correct. If you receive it as a gift, then you have what's called carryover basis. So whatever the basis of the person who owned it, their basis, that carries over. You received it while they were still living. So it carries over and you have the exact same basis. So in that example, they would have had a basis of 50,000. If they sold it for 3 million, they're paying tax on that entire difference, all of that gain over, 2,970,000 of gain. If they receive it as an inheritance, then when it's worth 3 million on the date of death, they get a $3 million basis. That's their stepped up basis. And then they can sell it and not pay tax on the 3 million. Now, if they wait 5 years to sell it and it's now gone to 5 million, they're going to have to pay tax on that 2 million of growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They'll pay capital gains tax on the growth after the date that they inherit it.
And with, often if people recommend, let me get my thoughts here together. Often people recommend, they're like, this is why you should probably get an appraisal right at the time of final passing. Yes. When the property transfers, because it's been 2 years in this particular instance with this question. And it's probably fairly easy today to still kind of find out roughly. And I think the IRS just wants to have a pretty rough idea. I don't think that they kind of get too far in the weeds on this, but you still want to make sure you can't just make up an arbitrary number, right? That's the point, is you have to have a value so that if it does appreciate and you do sell it later on, you are paying that capital gains on whatever that might be. And I'm guessing, Liz, that's probably what, standard 15% capital gains maybe for most people?
Yeah, it would depend on your tax rate, how much your taxable income in, because there's layers.
Gotcha.
So there's 0% capital gains, and then it goes to 15% capital gains, and then it goes to 20% capital gains. But back to the first thing that you were talking about, getting an appraisal.
Uh-huh.
You do want to document, and this is something I talk to people about, document at that point a fair market value for that piece of property. Because you don't know how long you're going to hold it necessarily. You don't know what values are going to do over that period of time. And you don't know if the IRS might ask for documentation. I mean, we're always told to keep our records that if they did ask, well, here's why I'm using this number or this value or taking this deduction. And so you just want to have that in your files. And it's certainly a lot easier to get that done at that point in time than try and go back, years in the future and figure that out.
Well, from the sake of the argument, so we got, for this particular person's question, we got 4 siblings here, right, who get the house. So let's just say, for the sake of the argument, Liz, that there is a small taxable amount. Let's say that, they sat on it for 2 years. The step up in basis kicked in, obviously, when mom passed, and they sell it. Maybe they sell it for a modest bump up from what it was estimated to be, right? So it's not a big tax bill. I would assume that gets divided 4 ways, or does that kind of depend on how the inheritance was laid out as well?
Yeah, it would. As far as who legally owes the tax, it would depend on how did that flow through a trust or probate court, who is on the title, who are the tax documents going to go to. If it's a piece of property that is your personal residence and it's quite obvious that when you sell it, it's below any threshold for capital gains, because when you apply the capital gains exclusion, there's not going to be any capital gains tax to pay, then it's possible that you don't even get a tax document in that situation. A lot of times they're not even created for the sale of a primary residence. But when it's not your primary residence, they're going to create that tax document showing what it's sold for. And then the IRS is going to look to that person, whatever that Social Security number is on that document, to report that. And so you don't want to have a plan in place for how you're going to divide that up. If this family, we don't know, if they had it in a revocable living trust, and then they sell it, then that gets reported to the trust, and then the trust reports it to them, equally, assuming that they are equal heirs in that trust document, which I would assume would be the case.
Right, I'm just kind of making those assumptions too, yeah.
Yeah, we're guessing at some of the facts, but all of that is planning that needs to go into place beforehand. If you're leaving any kind of property, it can get a little bit more complicated because you've got to have everybody agree to sell it. It's got to be a good time to sell it, and then it flows through to everybody based on their share.
Gotcha.
And so you want to know how that's going to be set up, on the deeds, or is it owned by a trust, which then can make it a little bit easier for some of these steps, and do some pre-planning ahead of time in your own situation if you've got property. I have clients that have rental properties and ranches and second vacation homes. And so, just thinking through how to have that transfer to the heirs and make that efficient, and then allow people to think through, well, are we going to sell it? Are we going to keep it? Are we going to use it? Are we going to, what are the things that are going to happen with this property, and making sure that everybody's kind of on the same page.
Gotcha. From a non-tax standpoint, for real fast, let's just touch on a couple of things. Because when you were talking about a trust, for example, or a different piece of property, it got me thinking, like, especially in a situation like this where it starts out where one person wants to sell and a couple others don't, right? So that kind of drags out the timeline. If you are mom and dad in this situation and you're thinking about leaving a vacation home or a beach house or something like that, what are some things to think about, especially if you set this up? Is it worthwhile to set up a trust and then maybe fund that to handle property taxes or maintenance costs, right? To maybe take some of that argument or some of that conversation out of the equation. Maybe that's something worth thinking about for some folks.
Yeah, I do think it is. If you set up a trust, you can put language in the trust as to what you expect to have happen with this property, or kind of some guidelines for whoever the trustee is.
Okay.
You can also have one of the children or an outside trustee. You can have one person that's making the decision, as opposed to everybody has to agree and be on the same page. And so as the person who owns the property, you may have an idea of what makes the most sense. Mm-hmm. Does it make sense for the family to keep this? Sometimes people want to keep ranch land or other land
That's what I was thinking,
within the family. And so they want to, they don't want to open it up to that something different happening. And so they'll set up the trust and they'll fund the trust and they'll have language in there as to how that's taken care of over time, how those decisions are made. And other people know that, really the best thing is we need to sell this piece of property and divide it up and give everybody their cash and let them all take it and go.
Yeah.
And so they'll have that written into the document to give some guidelines and make it very clear as to what their wishes are.
Gotcha.
When you have a piece of property where, kind of everybody has to agree, then sometimes one person will hold out for other reasons. Has nothing to do with the piece of property. It has something to do with other things that are going on. And so they'll hold out and not agree to, signing off on that sale. And you want to think about that in advance as well, so that doesn't happen, where it doesn't become an issue.
Yeah.
But, bottom line, when you have property, if the family inherits that, they don't have to worry about the taxes. That becomes one of the least concerns in the whole.
Yeah, it feels
plan.
complicated, right? But in this situation, again, as long as it's passed on after, and I guess to really address this person's question, which was how you started, was that step up in basis is the real game changer there, right?
Now, let's say that the property is actually it's gone down in value.
Oh, okay. All right.
Let's say that mom and dad bought some piece of vacation property and it was at a high and, property values have come down. Well, then they would get what's actually called a step down in basis if they leave it until they pass away. Mm-hmm. If they go ahead and give it while they're living, then that higher cost basis carries over.
Gotcha. So they get the step down, and so it just works in reverse, the same exact way. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So they bought some, it was at a high when property was way overvalued. It makes sense to go ahead and give it away if they're not going to sell it themselves and preserve that higher cost basis, because that can carry over. There's some complications to, what value the person sells it at and which cost basis is used. So they would have to talk through that. But there's some things to think about based on the value of the property compared to what they bought it for and what the goal is as far as keeping it or selling it. What makes the most sense?
Yeah.
Do you give it away? Do you leave it at death? And either way, the tax cost should not be, you can work through that to have the least tax cost by thinking through those things.
Yeah, I think for most people, they're probably going to fall into that step up in basis category,
Yes.
especially if mom and dad live someplace for 30 or 40 years, right? Just the value in general, even not just from the crazy highs, just in general has gone up, obviously over that time period. So I think most of the time you're going to be in that situation where, to this, again, this person's question was, how do I explain this? How do I articulate this? And it's like, well, with the step up in basis, that's really what they were looking for. If mom paid $100,000 for it and you're selling it for $1 million, you don't have to eat all that tax. So you get that step up in basis.
Right.
So,
which is why we call it step up in basis, because most of the time it is a step up.
Yeah.
We don't even refer to it as a step down.
Yeah.
But it can happen.
Sure.
So you do
Okay.
want to be aware of it.
That's good
But
to know.
most of the time it is a step up in basis, and people are able to eliminate the tax. And this applies to stocks. It applies to bonds. It applies not just to the house you live in. It applies to
Correct,
capital
yeah.
assets.
Yeah, if they left them some stock or something like that as well,
Yes.
right? Okay. Well, I think once families understand the tax rules and actually how they work, Liz, the decision becomes a little less about fear and maybe about more what makes most sense for everybody, right? So again, it sounded kind of like, probably some of the sisters were either worried about the taxes, there was probably some sentimental value, right? So you're kind of trying to get through all those hurdles. And if you can remove that tax one, which sounds fairly easy to do, then that maybe makes it easier to get to the nitty gritty and make the decisions you need to make. And it's all about timing, I think, sounds like as well. So yeah, I mean, a lot of good stuff here today on the podcast. Liz, as always, thank you so much for breaking it down and helping this listener out. If you've got questions, you need some help, as always, reach out to Liz. And you can find her online at bestpathadvisors.com. That's bestpathadvisors.com. She's the founder and financial advisor at Best Path Advisors. And of course, it might be the busy season. We're all thinking about taxes and stuff, but don't let that be a deterrent to not reach out and get some questions going and get some time onto the calendar for yourself. Again, you can find her at bestpathadvisors.com. And you can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and check out our YouTube channel as well. All of that stuff right there on the good stuff. Liz, thanks for your time this week. As always, I appreciate you.
Thank you. See you next time.
We'll see you next time here on Retire on Your Best Path with Liz Whittaberry.
The preceding program is sponsored by Best Path Advisors, which is solely responsible for its content. Securities offered through J.W. Cole Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through J.W. Cole Advisors. Best Path Advisors, J.W. Cole Financial, and J.W. Cole Advisors are unaffiliated entities. The opinions expressed by Liz Whittaberry should not be construed as specific tax, legal, or investment advice, nor as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Neither J.W. Cole Financial nor its representatives provide legal, tax, or accounting advice. Persons who provide such advice do so in a capacity other than as a registered representative of J.W. Cole. Investing is subject to risks, including the loss of principal. Due to volatility within the markets mentioned, opinions are subject to change without notice. Information is based on sources believed to be reliable, however, their accuracy or completeness cannot be guaranteed.